How much fat on keto? Is it safe to eat all that fat on keto? Am I getting enough fat on keto? Am I eating too much fat on keto? Do I have to worry about fat on keto? Today we're going to talk about all those things and we're going to put them in perspective for you so that it all makes good sense. Coming right up. I'm Dr. Ekberg. I'm a holistic doctor and a former Olympic decathlete. If you like to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss anything. We're going to go over 5 principles, 5 questions that people often have. And the first one is it safe with all that fat? They've heard of success stories. People get on keto, they lose weight for the first time in their life, they reverse their high blood pressure and their cardiovascular disease and their diabetes goes away. They hear these good things, but they've also heard a million times that fat is bad. We live in a society with fat phobia, and if you look hard enough, you're sure to find some studies that will prove to you that fat is bad. But for every study that says one thing, there are several others that say something else. So we need to understand this about those studies, that if you take 1,000 people and you put them in a study for weight loss and they are overweight to start with, that's why they're in the study for weight loss, those people are going to be insulin resistant. They're going to have chronically high levels of insulin, which means that they are still in a storage mode. Their body has a tendency to store, to stash away, to compile everything that they eat, whether it's fat, protein, or carbohydrate, but it's the carbohydrate that drives the insulin that creates the storage. So now, if they find out that the people who eat the most fat have the most cardiovascular disease, it's because those people also maintain a high level of carbohydrate to keep that insulin going. So while you have a high level of insulin, no food is a good food because it will all tend to be stored. And cardiovascular disease and diabetes and all these metabolic syndrome diseases are storage diseases. We have to stop storing and we have to retrieve some of that fuel, and we can only do that by reducing insulin, by reducing carbs and going longer between meals. So it's not a problem of the fat, even though there's a correlation. The problem is the insulin, and we have to reduce that. So is fat safe? Yes, as long as you do something to reduce your insulin at the same time. Number 2, people ask, well, isn't keto this thing where you eat a lot of fat? Isn't more fat better on keto? Isn't that the whole point? You want to burn fat, so the more fat you eat, the better. Well, actually, it's not really about the fat. It is about carbs, and it's about lowering the carbs to a level where your body has to learn to burn fat. If you eat tons of carbs, you're in storage mode, like we said, and you're not burning. The carbs get converted to fat, the extra protein get converted to fat, and the extra fat you eat gets stored as fat because of the high insulin. Therefore, it's not about the fat, it's about lowering the carbs so that the insulin lowers, and then the only food that does not raise insulin is pure fat. That's why you fill up on fat. You eat a little bit of tiny amount of carbs, you eat moderate protein, and then you eat enough fat to be full. But it's not about eating as much fat as possible, it's just eating enough to get full. How much is that? Well, typically, keto kicks in really well when you eat about 5% of your calories from carbohydrate. You eat about 20% of calories from protein, which is moderate. It's not a high or a low. Low would probably be better if you can still keep the carbs. If you're very insulin resistant, you might want to push this 20%, even a little bit lower. And then fat is 75% of calories, but that's not the goal. That's just kind of what is left over when you have the carbs and the protein at a low and moderate level. So if you eat about 1,500 calories, then you would eat somewhere around 125 grams of fat. If you eat about 2,000 calories, you'd eat about 165 grams of fat. If you eat 2,500 calories to get full, then you'd eat about 210 grams of fat. So you do not try to eat. It's not that more fat is better. It's that you want to reduce the carbs to a low enough level, and then you got to eat something, and that something becomes fat. Of course, you want to eat good quality fat as much as possible. Should be grass-fed butter, extra virgin olive oil, organic coconut oil, avocado, and of course all the natural fats from healthy meats, healthy dairy, and nuts. The third thing we want to cover is the question, can you overeat? Because most people have at some point in their life eaten a whole lot of carbohydrates, and they know that it is very easy to overeat. It's very easy to overeat ice cream. You can eat a whole tub of ice cream. You can eat a whole pecan pie. You can eat a whole bag of chips because there is no satiety. The carbohydrates drive the insulin puts you in storage mode, and the purpose of that is whatever you're eating that's full of carbohydrate is supposed to be stored. You're saving up for the winter. Your body is trying to get as much as possible to put into storage. That's why when you eat carbohydrates, it is so easy. It happens by itself. You don't have to try. That's why carb becomes an addiction. With fat, it is much, much harder to overeat. It is very difficult to sit down with a bag of avocados and eat too much. You might succeed once, but then you get full for so long that you just don't want to eat for a while. Same thing with a fatty steak or with butter or a bulletproof coffee or bacon. If you eat something with a lot of fat, it is so satisfying and you're not triggering the insulin to put you in storage mode. Whatever you eat is still circulating in the body, available for fuel, so you don't eat, you have no desire to eat typically until you have burned through that fuel and you're ready to replenish it. So your body is learning to regulate the appetite, something that was lost when you eat all those carbs. Now, the next question is it possible? We said that it's hard to overeat fat, but is it possible? And the answer is yes, absolutely, because a lot of us have emotional attachments to food, things that taste good. We not necessarily hungry, but we just want the flavor. We just want the mouthfeel of something. And then we are so smart and so clever as to invent all these desserts and all the cookies and all the drinks that have 0 carbs. We sweeten them with stevia and monk fruit and these healthy sugar substitutes. But the thing to realize is they sort of mimic carbs. They can still feed our carb addiction because we feel like we're getting that sweet taste, we're getting the mouthfeel, we're getting that satisfying experience, and that makes it very, very easy to overeat. So the cookies and the fat bombs and the hot chocolate, they're okay, but realize that they are the little extra. Those are little treats that you award yourself just as treats, not as one of the basic food groups. When you start treating them as basic food groups, now they very easily will maintain your addictions and make it relatively easy to overeat. So can you overeat? Yes, but eat whole food and then it's much, much harder. Use the cookies and the treats as a treat. Number 4, do I have to count calories? Should I count calories? Well, do calories matter? And the answer is yes, calories always matter because in the end, the people who advocate calorie counting and calorie restriction, they're right in the sense that it is a closed system. It is physics, calories in, calories out. What they're missing is that it's about hormones that drive the desire to tell you how much calories to eat. So if you try to restrict calories, meaning you always eat a little bit less than you would like, then you will always fail. Because if you eat a little bit less than you like, that by definition is you are slightly deprived. And you can keep that up for a while, but you cannot keep it up indefinitely. So the people who try to diet by only restricting calories, they eat the same average standard processed foods and they just eat less of it, those will fail miserably very quickly. If you eat low carb, then you will get less appetite, so it's easier to control the calorie. The calories can drop without you feeling so deprived, but it's not a good idea to purposely try to control the calories. It is better to don't worry about the calories and use the tools of low carb, high fat, keto, intermittent fasting to lower your insulin resistance, because once the insulin resistance drops, then your appetite will drop. Just keep in mind what we talked about previously, that you want to stick to the whole food. You don't want to start treating fat bombs as your next food group. And then the only other thing is trial and error, because low carb, high fat, keto, intermittent fasting, they're all tools. And I know that you're going to read some comments somewhere, some guy, he started in January and 4, 5, 6 months later, he just did low carb, he just did keto, he does a little bit of everything, and he's lost 80 pounds in 5 months. And that's going to be, there's a lot of people out there like that. And if that doesn't happen to you, don't despair. Okay, it's not fair. We're all different. We have a different genetic predisposition. We have different levels of insulin resistance. So don't worry about what happens to other people. Just know that these are tools, and if you apply them enough, then eventually it will work. But you might have to do some trial and error. You might have to play around with the amount of carbohydrate. You might have to play around with the number of meals and the length of your fast. So some people do intermittent fasting, and 18-hour fasting is plenty. They start shedding weight. Other people do OMAD for a year and nothing happens. They fast 24 hours, they eat one meal, and they still can't lose the weight. So these are tools. If that's the case for you, then you just need to extend the fast. You go 36 hours, you go 42 hours, and if you need to, you go longer. But it will work if you're consistent and you measure and you monitor and you understand these are tools and that you can use them incrementally. So calories do matter, but don't count calories. Let them happen. Let the calorie restriction happen automatically as you become less hungry. As you get into ketosis, as you reduce your insulin, then your body starts burning the fat off the body and you become less hungry. So number 5, I'm trying to do all this stuff, but I'm not losing weight. Am I eating too much fat? Well, maybe. So the first thing that I would look at is make sure that you are in ketosis. Because just because your neighbor got in ketosis on 30 grams of net carbs does not mean that that's low enough to get you in ketosis. It probably is, but maybe not. So the only way to be sure is to measure. And if you get yourself a nice little measuring kit that has ketone sticks, then you measure that here and there, and you want to make sure that you have enough ketones in your bloodstream. Probably you want to be at least over 1.0. Probably even better is somewhere between 1.5 and 3 would be a really good level of nutritional ketosis. But you might be eating 25 grams of carbs and not even be close to ketosis, and then that's the problem. But you got to measure it to know. You may also be eating too much protein. Some people can go carnivore and reduce their insulin resistance. They eat tons and tons of protein, and that's good for them. But if you're eating a good bit of protein, protein does stimulate a lot of insulin as well. Even if you eat a lot of fat with the protein is still going to trigger insulin, because insulin is a anabolic. It's a storage, it's a building hormone. Anytime you eat something that needs to be stored or that needs to be used for building materials such as protein, you will release insulin. So that's why keto talks about moderate protein, and for some people that's moderate to low protein. So in that case, you might want to shoot for lowering that down to maybe 15% and see what happens. You could be eating too much fat in the sense that you're eating so much fat your body doesn't have to burn anything off the body. The whole idea of keto is that you lower carbs so your body becomes fat adapted. It learns how to burn fat because there is no other fuel. And then as you burn the fat, you produce ketones as a byproduct, and now you know that you're fat adapted. But you can be in ketosis, you can be fully fat adapted, you can have ketones soaring through your bloodstream and not burn an ounce of your body fat if there is enough fat that you're eating. If you're eating so much fat, if you're putting more fat in, the body says, great, I got all this fat coming in, I'll burn that, I'm in ketosis, but there's no need to burn the fat off the body. So the idea is, and especially if you eat whole food and not the cookies and the fat bombs, that your appetite decreases and your body now has an infinite supply of fat from the body that you don't need to eat so much fat. So can you eat too much fat? Yes, in the sense that your body doesn't need to burn any of its own supply. So, but you don't have to force that. You don't want to force it by trying to restrict calories. If anything, you push it by increasing your length of fasting. And that brings us to the last point here about intermittent fasting. That's your last tool, because some people are so insulin resistant. I have had people who have been on keto for years, keto or low carb for years. Their blood glucose is in the 80s, their A1C is 5.1, 5.2, and yet their insulin reads at 25. So this person is so extremely insulin resistant that the low carb, the keto diet is not enough. Their body so stubbornly refuses to burn that body fat that it makes them, they still have a very high appetite to eat all those calories, eat all that food, enough to sustain their metabolism and enough to sustain their body weight. And if they eat less, they get hungry and their basal metabolic rate goes down. So for these people, low carb keto is not enough. They need to extend the length of the fasting because their bodies won't touch the fat stores. The body will make them eat more fat. Even if they stick to the percentages prescribed, then they can go longer between meals. They feel satisfied. They don't have the cravings for carbs, but their bodies tell them to maintain that same level of calories and it still won't burn that body fat. So intermittent fasting, extending the fast, 36, 42, 48, 72 hours, that will break through that barrier eventually. So realize that there is no quick fix for things that took decades to develop. Yes, fat is safe. The rest of this, they're tools. Low carb, keto, intermittent fasting, they're tools. Some tools need to be applied a little bit for some people and they need to be applied a lot for other people. That's where the trial and error and the experience and monitoring and measuring comes in. Just learn this stuff, be patient, and know that it's going to work if you understand it and you do it long enough. If you're new to the channel and you appreciate this kind of information, make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell so we can keep this content coming your way. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.